We are one of the largest meetings and events production company in the world. What you all are experiencing is what we do day in and day out. Literally delivering live experiences is our product. So I guarantee many of you have been recipients of the events that we have delivered over the time that you've been coming to conventions, to meetings, to shows just like this. So we operate with around 2,200 venue partners inside hotels, just like this. And we have over 350,000 events, which touch about 25 million attendees. And that is done with over 12,000 team members across the globe on 21 different countries. So it's a very complex, very human business that has to be moving constantly and delivering these amazing experiences. So, to just give you a little bit of background of what brought us to kind of a new CX journey. So, we have to go back to COVID. Now, I know you don't want to, so just bear with me for a minute. We won't spend too much time in this space. But if you remember, COVID hit and there was the boom and the bust, right? So, we can remember companies that were booming. Bicycles. Did people start buying bicycles here? Toilet paper. Maybe we didn't think there was enough of that. Home delivery. But there was companies like ours that we were in the bust. Like literally the floor dropped out of our business. And during that time, we lost probably almost 80% of our staff during that time. And there was no events happening. That risk receded in the industry was coming back, it came roaring back. It accelerated that need for being together, human connection again, being in person. But we had this tension point because now we had to hire and train all of these people back. And so you can imagine how difficult of a time period that was, both for our customers as well as for our staff members, where you had great acceleration, revenue through the roof, service scores that were not great because we just had a lot of new people and we were trying to chase after this. So the other thing that happened was there was a whole new expectation about how people wanted to get together and meet. So a lot of small meetings, they went online. You guys can all remember that. Those kind of stayed there. But now when people got back together, they wanted these huge experiential type events that were putting a very big demand on how we had to show up for our customers, how we had to operate, and how our people had to be trained. The other thing is that there was this sort of generational handoff that's been happening. So we have a lot of Gen Z, a lot of millennial meeting planners, because a lot of meeting planners also left that market during that time as well. They were coming on. The attendees, the expectations for technology, all of that was changing, and we had to change with it, and we had to show up a different way. We doubled down and said, look, our growth strategy, our ability to operate in this environment, and we had a lot of competitors coming in and trying to take that share away as the business was coming back online. We really doubled down about having those relationships with our customer and differentiating through the experience we were going to give with them. We touch more customers than anyone else in the market. And we really want to be a partner, especially earlier on in the journey with them. And so that meant investing very heavily in customer experience and aligning our organization around the new way to operate, the new way to show up for these customers. So in order to accelerate that, we really had to engage with a partner. And that's where Material came in. And we engaged with them and asked us to please come on our journey with us, help us develop a new CX strategy, help us sell it through the organization, and ensure that we come out exceptional for our customers. And that's what we want to show you today is what that journey was like and the work that we did together.
So when Encore came to us, we really wanted to take a step back and figure out what drove this business. So as Jill just said, very complex, high pressure moments. So we really needed clarity and focus on how to move forward together. We undertook an 8-week sprint where we really looked at the way the business operated. We took a cross-functional approach where we talked to HR, finance, operations, sales, marketing. We went on site, shadowed teams that were executing these events, and we kept coming back to these two questions: what actually moves the business and what truly matters to the customer? And what we found is that teams were incentivized on the OSAT score. which was leading to unintended behaviors of score chasing. There was a lot of data, but it was siloed and fragmented across different systems and platforms, and dashboards lacked focus and prioritization. We had the feedback coming in, but beyond those top line scores, we weren't really looking at the root causes and driving action through that feedback. And then leaders had really no view into risk, and early warning signs were hidden. Established that the organization really needed to shift how the business thought, learned, and operated. Together, we built a 2-year roadmap with 28 recommendations across 6 domains: culture, measurement, learning, communications, talent, and customer engagement. We then mapped those 28 recommendations to look at the impacts they would have on the organization, the feasibility of implementing those 28 recommendations, and cost in order to prioritize. We were really intentional about how we sequenced these recommendations so that we could start with establishing that foundation, culture, in order to really ensure that the organization was ready to deliver great customer experience. So starting there, what does great mean in this case, right? So we know that at Encore scale, doing your best is not good enough. We needed some consistency, we needed some direction so that we could limit that complexity and that confusion across the organization. So we started with a vision. This was the North Star to really rally the organization around. We co-created this with cross-functional teams to make sure that it really resonated with the organization. It was meaningful, it felt personal to Encore. And here we are. Together, we transform ordinary moments into Encore performances, inspiring one customer, one event, one venue at a time. So this was not really intended just to be aspirational, but really to give direction and clarity across the organization as we move on this journey together.
And just real quick, this is a rally cry that we continue in our organization at every one of our leadership meetings. We just had our leadership summit last week, and we bring this in to the organization all the time because it is our North Star.
From there, we had to translate the vision into guiding principles. So again, this was not intended to just be a poster on a wall in a conference room or on their desktop. It was really intended to become the credo, a statement of beliefs and values to guide actions and decision making across the organization. You can see we used Encore as kind of the acronym here to bring it to life for the company. And this is really intended to support real world decisions. Again, high complexity, high visibility, live events. We really need to make sure that the team members could make decisions under pressure in real time. And this became kind of the framework or the shared language on how to act, not just what we value.
Again, you can, if you remember back to showing 2,200 venues, we have 2,200 minimum places where team members are, and trying to create consistency is very challenging. And so this is what's helping us do that.
From there, we really wanted to focus on customer emotion. Again, high pressure moments, emotions are running high. So we really wanted to double down on the emotions that we wanted the customers to feel. I think we all know the importance of emotions in delivering a great customer experience, right? They're drivers of satisfaction and loyalty, brand perception. They have an outsized impact on purchase decisions. So it's really important that we grounded the organization around those target emotions. So here we're looking for meeting planners, customers to feel heard, to feel confident in the team that is executing their event, and to feel supported along the way. And then taking all of that, the vision, the guiding principles, the target emotions, we develop standards for the organization. So this is where really the consistency piece comes in. Here we have the universal standards that everybody across the organization follows, as well as we had standards for every step of the journey. So as you're planning your meeting, as you're executing the meeting, post meeting, we have individual standards for each of those. The idea is that no matter what venue you go to, what event you're planning, who you're talking to at Encore, you're getting a consistent experience across the board. This is where that kind of abstract vision started to be operationalized across the organization. So now that we'd kind of set that foundation for the culture, we turned to the next phase of the roadmap, which was measurement. So here, we really wanted to focus on what was the purpose of the Voice of the Customer program. There was something existing, but we really need to rethink what was the purpose given this new strategy and the priorities across the organization. So we focused on what mattered, right? So prioritizing drivers of satisfaction and loyalty that we now know are important. We wanted to reinforce those standards across the organization as they started to scale across all these teams and venues, countries. And we really wanted to focus on uncovering those early signs of risk before they became issues, before they escalated. With understanding what the purpose of the Voice of the Customer program is, we could then start rebuilding from the ground up. We wanted to focus on things that Encore employees could actually action on, things that they could change, things that matter to the customer. Again, those drivers of satisfaction and brand loyalty, the standards that were being rolled out across the organization. And then at the same time, we removed anything that wasn't relevant, that was creating noise without bringing in new insights. The goal here was not to collect more data, but to really focus the organization on what was important to drive action and improve accuracy. So here, we ended up with a simpler questionnaire, a better survey taking experience, and a unified feedback tool that could drive action across the organization. Next, we focused on how to deliver these insights to the organization. So we always think about what is the business question that teams are trying to ask or trying to answer. So we started with the front line here. We know the front line. Their job is to execute events. It is not to be data analysts, right? So we needed to surface the insights that they need quickly. They have 5 minutes in the morning, drinking their cup of coffee. They needed to get what they needed and get out, get on with their day, take action. At the same time, executives needed to see the patterns and the trends across events, across venues, so they could start making systematic improvements across the enterprise. So we focused on what are the questions that they're really trying to answer. We held workshops, cross-functional workshops with different teams, understanding their workflows, understanding what they're trying to accomplish. Questions like, where is the experience breaking down? What's happening consistently across venues, across events? And what needs attention now? We wanted the insights to be obvious, not hidden, so they didn't have to work hard to find them. Then we focused on elevating the customer voice. So as we said previously, the focus had been on OSAT scores, those top line scores, and the unstructured feedback had really been ignored before this. So we spent a lot of time updating text analytics, bringing that customer voice forward, connecting it back to the target emotions that we had established earlier, really making the customer voice become important across the organization. We launched Voices TV at the corporate headquarters to bring that voice forward, and the Voices app for executives.
Yeah, this is probably one of the most simplest tools that we delivered and is probably one of my most favorite. Is that what I said at our leadership meeting is I'm bringing the voice of the customer into the pocket wherever you are. So you have no excuse now to not say, hey, I'm reading 10 customer cards a day. And then again, you can imagine 95% of our staff is in the field. But for the ones that are sitting in the corporate offices that don't feel like they really understand what the customer is saying, now that we have them kind of put up on this big board, and every day when they go to lunch it's rolling through and they can read customer comments. So it's that, how do you pull this customer centricity through the entire organization so that every person understands their role is to deliver to that customer.
Of course, all this is only as good as enablement, right? So if the teams can't use it, it's kind of pointless. So we spent a lot of time building out training materials, support materials to equip the teams to understand how to use the new dashboards, what we are trying to accomplish. We focus on practical how-tos, like how to read the dashboards, right? How to decide what to do next based on what you're seeing on the dashboard, how to respond to customers, and how to improve over time. We built different training modules and training support materials based on the different teams. So it was very personalized to what they're trying to accomplish each day. The goal here was to make them feel confident and empowered to make changes at the local level. And then, of course, this wasn't just for the front line. It was really important that we brought the whole organization together across executives, the corporate employees, regional leaders, to make sure that the whole organization united around providing a great customer experience. So after all this work, we're making things easier. Clear signals as to what matters most to the customer, those rise to the top, visibility of where the experience breaks down, shared understanding of gaps in the experience. So now teams understand where they show up and how they can provide a great experience and where we need some work. Alignment among leaders, right? So now they all have a unified view. They can see what is going on with the customer. We can make intelligent investment decisions and prioritization around those systematic improvements that are needed. And now is a system to hold the organization accountable to delivering those outcomes for the customer.
You've seen a lot of work in a very short period of time, but you can imagine this was a lot of work in progress. This journey started in about 2023. And so we have had tremendous results. And, we didn't put all the data up here. I could talk about the OSAT scores and all that stuff. But I think the two things that are really important is what was the business impact and what was the impact for our employees. And so we did see really good gains in our growth, 6% year over year. We have really strong retention rates with our venue partners, and we have the lowest employee turnovers in history. So we're trending around a 3% decrease from where we were. And we're really excited that we have gotten the Great Places to Work status in 11 of our countries. We're also one of the Fortune Best Places to Work in Chicago and quite a few other cities. And so the impact for our employees has been tremendous as well, that they are feeling, what we did and the work that we're doing with our customers. Definitely is we're happy to see those results. But the work is not done. So this curve kind of shows like, we started with, hey, we have to understand this new world that we're working in and how do we have to operate? How do we have to show up for our customers? We had to get our foundation back in place. We had to get consistency back. And we had to really connect all of the data points. And you saw all of that. But we're at another inflection point, just like we were with COVID. So we're about to go into a boom and bust again. And I'm sure many of you here are thinking about this with your organizations, either your company, you're concerned, yourself, your job that you're doing. We believe that we are going to be on the boom end of this finally, not the bust end, because people are going to want to get together in person, real and authentic more than ever with the advances of AI. And so we're starting to think about that. There are going to be, again, new expectations that is going to be put onto us as to how you all want to get together at events like this and the expectations and the customers and their demands that they're going to have for us. And so we have to be on top of that and ahead of it. And so we're moving into more what does that experience should look like in the future? We have to get into designing those experiences, not letting them happen to us. And then we have to be a lot more proactive and predictive about those needs as they are changing really fast. So certainly we're going to be leaning into the AI tools that we're learning about here and, trying to bring more of that so that we can be ahead of the game on those things. So that is what we needed to show you today. And then we're going to go to some Q&A. The code, you're supposed to scan it to give feedback, and then we'll take any questions or comments.
You showed a lovely Gantt chart up there earlier with kind of the different metrics and prioritizations. Can you talk a little bit about, you said it was a 2-year journey, sort of what check marks you did along the way and how you kind of measured your progress to make sure that you were on track and nothing was really going awry?
Yeah, so I think the couple things. Obviously, we had to get all of our stakeholders in our company organized around this, right? And so, of course, like most of you have steer codes and things like that that we put together that were part of the process. I think early on we worked with material to talk about what were some of the things that had to happen, for second, third. So obviously it was, hey, we have to look at like our old standards and what is changed, what is different, and get, kind of start to think about what to the new ones. We were constantly checking in with our field employees and ensuring that we're always operating in reality. And so having regular checks for that, piloting, we definitely did piloting. So instead of rolling stuff out all of a sudden one day across the entire enterprise, we would test and learn and then slowly roll things out, after we kind of made sure that things were kind of feeling right before. That takes time. There were some of our markets operate really different. Las Vegas is a really, really different market for us and how we operate. And so, you have to also think about that and think about how you bring those things together.
There's so many great things that you did. What do you think is the highest impact or had the highest impact on the success that you found in this work?
I would say two things. I've got some colleagues here that might have different thoughts and they could jump in too. First of all, I think that rally cry that you saw and making sure that came from the top down. So our CEO is constantly talking about this. This is a passion for his. Okay. So making sure that you have from the very top, I think is extremely helpful. I do think that the way that we went around redoing our dashboards, which are probably now going to change a bit, right, with AI, answering those business questions. Before we were just putting data, right? And so not everybody understands how to read data and, how to activate against it. And so answering those business questions, and then we put into place, we have what's called service ambassadors, and they're throughout the organization. They volunteer. They're people who are very passionate, and we meet with them. We have a director of service excellence that kind of oversees a lot of this. So also having people in place that are the champions across your organization. We were just having a conversation at lunch of we have a few other gaps of where to put some champions, and I think that makes a really big difference and a big impact.
I've heard a lot about standardization and unified standards and all these things, which makes totally sense. At the same time, I can imagine you're in a business where maybe some of your employees also see themselves rather as, let's call them artists. I'm wondering on that side of things, when we talk about employees, how did that resonate and what kind of pushbacks were there in the process as well?
I would agree with you. So the way that our business model operates, where we're sitting in hotels, those teams also have to operate under the culture of that hotel. So you all experience this. A Four Seasons is going to be very, very different than Marriott Renaissance. So yes, there is definitely local adaptation that has to be allowed to happen. And we're actually spending a lot more time talking about that right now and trying to improve upon how do you kind of do global standards but local execution, because you do have to be able to have that flexibility. I think that pushback comes a little bit when the standards feel too rigid. And again, if they're not grounded in reality. And so these are not fixed. Like, we will be going through a process this year of looking at them again and updating them and getting the feedback from the field and ensuring, we understand, like, hey, maybe this is too rigid. It's just not reality, anymore. And so I think that's where we start to get some pushback. Hopefully this has been helpful. If any of you are on a similar journey or starting your journey, I'm more than happy to spend more time talking to you. There's a lot of detail that we obviously didn't have time to go through. But we're really proud of the work that we did with Material. I'm really proud of the team and the progress we have made. It's not over. It's always a work in progress, as you guys know. And so, we're going to continue working on it. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.